Coding Made Easy.
So what's up everybody, and welcome to your next Java Made Easy tutorial. And in this tutorial we are going to be learning about the second principle of object-oriented programming. So the first principle we learned about was encapsulation, and basically what we learned about that was the general rule was to make everything private, and if that was too strict you work your way up by making it default, then protected, then public. We didn't really address protected. We will be addressing it in this tutorial, but that was a general rule of it. And now we're going to be learning about inheritance, and basically the general principle of inheritance is copying something from a parent class and putting it into a child class. And I'm just going to do a quick analogy. Let's just say, for example, that you're doing you're writing a rough draft for an essay, and you hand it into your professor to kind of proofread it, and your professor says, okay, I really like it, but I feel like you should add some more to it. So what would you do when you go home? Would you rewrite the essay from scratch all over again, or would you copy over what you've had before and then add data to it, or add more stuff to it? I'm pretty sure you would do the latter. And so that is essentially how inheritance works. You copy data from one class to the other, and then you can add your own additional data to that class to make it its own personal class. So we're going to see how we're going to do this. So I've created an entity class, a player class, and an enemy class. I copied over what we had from our player class in the previous tutorial and put in the entity class and changed the constructors' names to entity. So I've set the variables to the default, or as some people like to call it, package private, or package private, and I've added a set health method right there. So what we're gonna do is, in order to inherit all this stuff from this class, we simply just put extends entity, and we're gonna do the same thing for the enemy class, extends entity. Now, this is how it's gonna work. If anything is default, as long as the child class is within the same package as the parent class, then it's going to be copied over. Now, if they are in different packages, however, and you try to inherit from say the entity class, these variables will not be copied over into the parent class. So let's say that you want it so that even if they're in different packages, you want them to be passed over. What are you going to do? Well, you put protected. And what protected does is that it allows you, it's not as open as public, it's not available everywhere, but it allows you to, it is like a default, but that's extended. It has all the principles of a default variable or default method, but if you inherit from a class and the class is even in a different package, you will still inherit the protected variables. So basically that's all it is. And then if anything's public, everything public is inherited from the parent class as well. So just by saying extend entity, I have inherited all of these stuff. I've copied all of this data and pasted it right smack into the player class. And if you don't believe me, I'll show you an example right now. So I'm just gonna say player.displayValues. That's it. That's all I'm gonna do. And as you can see, it displays my value 100, defense 20, and attack power 10. But wait, hold on a second. How did it know to set health to 100? How did it know to set defense to 20? How did it know to set the attack power to 10? How did it know that? We didn't specify anything like that, and we didn't call the entity's constructor. Something must be going on. So what's going on? Well, let's do something. What we're going to do is we're going to say system out print line, and we're going to say entity constructor. And in the player class, we're going to create our constructor, and we're going to say system, and we're going to say player constructor. And so what we're going to do is we're going to run this program again, and as you can see, it says entity constructor, then it says player constructor. So whenever you extend or inherit from another a parent class, it calls the parent class's default constructor before it calls this default constructor. And so since this sets the health, the defense, and attack power, and since we inherit the health, defense, and attack power, then those values are set for our player class right off the bat. So the general rule about when do we inherit different, well, everything is called object-oriented programming for a reason, right? We want to represent real-world objects, right? And whenever you're inheriting from something or inheriting from a class, this is how you want to read it. We want to say, okay, the player is an entity, right? It is an entity. Now, if I was to say extends player, does this essentially make sense? Sorry, don't worry about the errors, don't worry about that. But does this essentially make sense? An entity is a player. An entity can be a player. An entity can be anything else, right? But an entity is not particularly a player. It can be, but it isn't. It isn't particularly in every single instance. But this makes sense. A player is an entity. And so that's how you want to look at it when you're actually creating objects. Everything that you look at, if you're in your room or wherever you are watching this tutorial, everything's an object. Everything is comprised of a bunch of smaller. For example, I have my PlayStation 3 right in front of me, and the PlayStation 3 has is a computer, but it is a specialized computer which allows us to play PlayStation 3 games. And so I can say that the PlayStation 3 is a computer, but a computer is not necessarily a PS3. Do you get that? So if I had an object, I had a class, and I had a PlayStation 3 class, it would make sense to extend from the computer class, because the computer class might have a CPU, it might have it will have a graphics card, it will have a fan, it will have yada yada yada, it will have all the components I need. But the PS3 still has additional stuff that a general computer might not have, right? It has specialized things to detect a PS3 game. It has, has internal components that a regular computer might not have. And so by extending the computer, we don't have to recreate we don't have to create a CPU, we don't have to recreate a graphics card, we don't have to recreate a fan, we don't have to recreate a case, we don't have to do that. All we have to do is just add the additional data that a regular computer doesn't have. And that's the beauty of inheritance. So for example, entities, sorry, let me just save this. So a player is an entity. An enemy in a game is an entity, but they might have some different properties. For example, in a game, for a player, you will monitor the experience points of the player. You don't need to monitor the experience points of an enemy, so that's not something that needs to go in the entity class. It doesn't need to go in there because only the player class adds it. So the entity does everything else a player needs. It has a setting, the health, as a displaying the values, as initialization. It does everything our player needs to do, and our player just adds the additional details that the entity class is missing. But instead of having to copy and paste this information into the player class and the enemy class, just by saying extends entity, it does that for us. So anyways, that's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you weren't confused, but if it kind of confused you, feel free to comment in the description below. And if a lot of people are having trouble on this concept, I'll make another video to kind of clarify on some details that you guys are kind of iffy on. So anyways, that's it for this tutorial. Don't forget to comment, rate, and subscribe. Don't forget to like on Facebook, follow on Twitter, and sign up on my website. And that's it. Bye for now.